Robb Stark stood upon a stretch of wind-scoured hill overlooking the rolling western plains, the salt and pepper fur of gray wind bristling against his leg. Dawn had scarcely broken, but the morning sky was already tinged by a pale and watery yellow. In that half-light, he could see the Lannister lands unfolding ahead like a disquieting promise. Far to the west, clouds scuttled across the horizon, and Robb could taste the brine of the distant sea on the back of his tongue. It reminded him how far from the north he had come. The moment felt unreal, a hush of anticipation before the next storm. But the memories of death that had brought him here were all too real. He had learned early in his campaign that war was a hungry beast that devoured youth, hope, and mercy. He'd lost men at the Whispering Wood, men at the Battle of the Camps, and more men still during the ambush that nearly claimed his own life. On the other side, Tywin Lannister had lost battles, but the Lannister pride remained unbroken. Even after Robb had bested Jaime in the field, it was not enough to pry open the lion's jaws. They would not yield. They never would. And so he had marched. By his side stood the Great Jon, his breath clouding around him in the crisp air. The Great Jon's voice was low, but resolute, a quiet rumble rolling in his throat. "We've come far, Your Grace," he said, letting the words hover. Farther than anyone believed possible. Robb thought of those who had tried to dissuade him, his mother insisting on a more diplomatic approach, his bannermen worried that the West was a step too far, even the Freys, traitorous though some might be, who had whispered that he was overreaching. But Robb had not flinched. The Lannisters had taken his father's head and triggered a chain of betrayals that only blood could repay. Yet it was not only revenge that pushed him. He believed in the North's freedom, believed in punishing the arrogant cruelty that had borne the lion's sigil for so long. A gust of wind pushed at the corners of his cloak, embroidered with the direwolf of House Stark. His father's spirit lingered in every breath he took. Ned Stark was gone, but he lived on in his son's sense of duty and justice. He would do what must be done, however bitter the cost. He would cast down Tywin Lannister's proud seat, root out their power, and show the realm that the North's vengeance was a sword that cut deeper than any man had anticipated. The gray wind let out a low growl. Robb glanced down and patted his companion's massive head, feeling the tension beneath the wolf's fur. There was a scent on the wind, one that made the direwolf uneasy. But there was no immediate threat here on this lonely rise, only the knowledge of the fortress ahead, Casterly Rock. Tywin Lannister's ancestral seat, carved into the stone cliff that faced the sunset sea, had never fallen in living memory. That knowledge weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Roose Bolton arrived a moment later, moving silently as a wraith, his demeanor cool, his expression pale. "Your Grace," he said softly, inclining his head. "The scouts report that the lower passes are only lightly guarded. Most of the Lannister forces remain in the field, or are stationed closer to the Gold Road, as if they expect us to come from the east." "Men? They do not expect a strike from the north and west," Robb said, letting the edges of a plan come together in his mind. He tapped his gloved fingers against his sword hilt. "But we must be cautious. Casterly Rock is more than a fortress. Its name alone resonates with fear and invincibility." The Great Jon snorted. "Huh. So did Harrenhal once. The greatest castle in the Seven Kingdoms, men called it, and we took it. Strength is a matter of men as much as walls." "Then show." Robb smiled faintly, remembering that night when they had overrun Harrenhal's guards. But Casterly Rock was carved of stories older than Harren's cursed fortress, and the Lannisters had wealth beyond measure. They would ensure that gold and steel protected the seat of their power. Still, in these times, with Tywin distracted by battles in the Riverlands, and the crown at King's Landing reeling under the threat of Stannis Baratheon, perhaps the rock was vulnerable. As the sun crept higher, revealing the dusting of dew on the tall grass, Robb turned to his men. Thousands of them had marched across half the continent, through snow and mud and blood. Their faces, etched with grime and exhaustion, bore the determined look of veterans who had won more victories than the realm had believed them capable of. The banner men of House Stark, House Tully, House Glover, and numerous others from the north, and the Riverlands crowded the hillside. They looked upon Robb with a potent mix of love, awe, and fear. They had named him king in the north, and they expected him to deliver them from Lannister tyranny. He cleared his throat, though he did not speak loudly. The men around him edged closer to hear. "We'll move at dusk. Keep the men silent. Keep them ready. We'll approach by the coastline where the rocks cliffs are. We found some smugglers who know a path near the sea caves. A secret way. Let the Lannisters think we come from the gate. We'll let them guess until it's too late." His voice carried authority, and no one questioned him. Robb caught a glimpse of the great Joan's grin, white teeth gleaming amid his beard. "We'll teach these lions that a wolf is not to be cornered. A cornered wolf is the most dangerous creature in the world." Roose Bolton's face betrayed no emotion. "Very well, Your Grace. I'll see to it." Quietly they dispersed. Robb remained on the ridge a moment longer, gazing at the far-off shape of the fabled rock. Distinct forms of crenellations and towers were impossible to make out from this distance, but there was no mistaking the massive cliff face that gave the fortress its name. This was the stronghold of House Lannister, a seat of gold and pride. The seat that had doomed Ned Stark, that had brought sorrow to the north, and had lit the fires of war. Now Robb would bring his own fire. He pulled his cloak closer and inclined his head toward Grey Wind, who padded behind him as Robb made his way down toward the bustle of his war camp. The air was thick with a hush of anticipation, an electric tension that kept the men quiet. Even the horses, picketed along a low ravine, seemed uneasy. The Northmen had not come all this way to hesitate. They had come to bring an ending. Evening fell slowly, cloaking the plains in purple shadows. The approach to Casterly Rock began. Robb walked among his bannermen, offering calm words that steadied their hearts more than any speech. He and his men slipped into the gloom near the coast, where jagged rocks rose from churning waters. Scouts led them along a narrow path at the edge of the sea, where waves crashed against stone. The wind carried the briny tang of salt that stung eyes and clung to hair. Grey Wind's pads on the stone were almost soundless. Robb marveled at how stealthy the dire wolf could be, far quieter than many of his best outriders. They waited until true darkness. A slice of moon cut the sky, neither too bright nor too dim. Tyrion Lannister, he had learned, had once spoken of hidden passages around the rock, some half-forgotten labyrinths older than living memory. Whether by rumor or bribe, Robb had discovered a cave system that might grant them an entrance from below. It was a risky plan. If the passage was a dead end, or if the Lannisters had discovered its existence, Robb and his men would be trapped like rats in a well. But fortune had so far favored the young wolf in many of his gambits. He prayed it would again. They found the cave mouth at the base of the cliff, concealed by barnacle-encrusted boulders and sea spray. The scent of rotting kelp and salt assaulting their noses made some men gag, but they pressed on, swords strapped tight, torches doused to keep them hidden. Only a few carried lanterns shuttered, so the light was minimal, enough to see by but not enough to betray their presence. From the fortress high above, the cavern was damp, the walls dripping with condensation. A hush permeated their ranks. Occasionally, a sword would scrape against rock, causing men to freeze, hearts pounding. But no sentry called from above. No alarm rang out. Step by step, they climbed through the bowels of the fortress. Robb's heart hammered in his chest, and he could see the tension in the set of Roose Bolton's shoulders, in the great Joan's quick glances behind them, in Edmure Tully's stiff posture. They moved upward for the better part of an hour. The path spiraled, sometimes narrowing, so that only one man could pass at a time. Twice, they found large chambers where dripping water and slick rock forced them to pause. Once, they discovered a small watchpost. It was empty. Robb wondered if some half-forgotten old knight was supposed to guard it, or if the Lannisters had never truly known of it, letting the centuries swallow the knowledge. The very idea that he might outwit the Lannisters in their own den spurred him on. The grit beneath his boots and the damp chill clinging to his cloak felt like an omen of success. When at last they emerged into a wide corridor lit by the faint orange glow of a wall-mounted sconce, Robb raised his hand to halt. The men froze, pressed against one another, and he listened carefully. There were voices echoing faintly from a distant hallway. The stone of the rock carried sound in strange ways. It was hard to tell if the voices were close or far. Robb's pulse quickened. They had made it inside, but how deep? And how many Lannisters lingered nearby? He gestured for the Great John to follow. Together, they crept forward, leaving the main body of men in the corridor. Ahead, the flickering torch revealed a small anteroom with casks of grain and salted meat stacked haphazardly. A storeroom, perhaps. No guards. No sign of immediate danger. Beyond that, a spiral staircase. Robb's mind spun as he recalled hastily compiled knowledge of the fortress layout. Casterly Rock was a labyrinth of halls and hidden passages. This was not going to be simple. He turned back to his bannerman, face grim yet determined. Spread out. Secure these lower levels, quietly. We'll take them from within. He summoned a handful of scouts with a jerk of his chin. Find the main gate. Quietly as you can, get it open. Send a runner if you meet a patrol. We do this swiftly or not at all. Nemdo. Men nodded. The Greyjohn flashed another wolfish grin, and they split into small units, their footfalls light against the stone floors. If they succeeded, they would have the fortress in hours. If they failed, they would face annihilation in the dark. Robb felt Grey Wind's muzzle brush his gauntlet. The direwolf's hackles were raised. He recognized that as a warning. There would be blood soon. They advanced step by cautious step. The corridors were narrower and older than those in more modern castles. The walls bore tapestries depicting gold lions prancing on crimson fields, and the floors were richly carpeted in some places, raw stone in others. Robb saw corners turning into new hallways, behind which Lannister men might lurk. He moved with his sword half drawn, the burn of adrenaline keeping him focused on every faint creak or echo. Down one long corridor, they found a pair of guards in gilded half-armor, speaking in low voices about shipments from Lannisport. The Great John and Robb exchanged a glance. Then they lunged. The guards had only time to gasp before the Great John's sword cleaved one man's throat. Robb's blade found the second guard's belly. The only sound was a muffled groan before the Lannisters collapsed, their lifeblood staining the stones. The Great John wiped his blade on the dead man's cloak. They were not expecting us, that's certain. Robb nodded. They pressed on. The corridor led to a set of double doors carved from heavy oak. A single Lannister crest, an ornate golden lion, was set into the wood. The pair tested the door, found it locked. One of their men, a wiry northerner adept at picking locks, knelt and worked the mechanism with trembling fingers. Behind them, Grey Wind's ears twitched. The lock gave with a soft click. Carefully they slipped inside. Beyond, they found a lavish antechamber with a high ceiling and pillars sculpted to look like rearing lions. Robb's gaze flicked around the room, searching for threats. More corridors branched off from this central space. From behind one pillar, a Lannister guard stepped forward, confused at first, then alarmed. He opened his mouth to shout, but Grey Wind was faster, launching with a snarl that sank teeth into the guard's throat. The guard's cry became a wet gurgle, echoing in the vaulted chamber. There was no time to hide the body. Already, footsteps pounded in a distant corridor. Someone had heard. Robb cursed under his breath. The game's up, he told his men, voice grim. We do this quickly now. Attack. A swirl of chaos. One corridor led deeper into the fortress, and from it came a flood of guards in red and gold surcoats, brandishing spears and halberds. They had no illusions left. The rock was under attack from within. Battle erupted in the antechamber. Robb slashed, feeling the jarring impact of steel on steel. The Great John roared, swinging his great sword in a wide arc that clove through mail and bone. Roose Bolton's men advanced with a grim efficiency, silent but deadly, using short blades to slip between ribs. Screams rang off the pillars, and blood spattered onto the marble floor. For a moment, Robb feared they would be overwhelmed, for more Lannisters came pouring out. But then the tide shifted. His reinforcements arrived from behind the pillars. Archers loosed arrows at close range, dropping men with fletched shafts in their throats or eyes. The Lannisters broke, their discipline faltering at the unexpected assault from so many directions in their own halls. Some tried to retreat. Others died standing their ground. Robb pressed forward, driving them deeper into the heart of the rock. He heard new commotion to his left and realized that some of his men had found the main courtyard. If they could open the gates, if they could let in the rest of their forces outside, the castle would be lost to the lions. Robb nodded fiercely to the Great John, and they fought their way toward that corridor, stepping over corpses and shattered weapons. Grey Wind prowled among the fallen, his muzzle wet with gore, eyes glowing in the torchlight. The corridor opened into a wide courtyard, ringed by tall walls with parapets. Torches flickered. Here, a larger group of Lannister soldiers, perhaps 50 strong, rallied around a gold and crimson banner. They had formed a shield wall. Their captain shouted curses, urging them to stand firm. Robb skidded to a halt, just beyond their formation, scanning the place for the gate mechanism. He spotted a heavy iron chain attached to a pulley system on the far side. The great portcullis was down, but beyond it, through the iron bars, he could see torches bobbing in the darkness. His men outside, waiting for their chance to storm the rock. Robb's men filtered into the courtyard behind him, forming a ragged line. The Great John gave a booming laugh. "Only 50 or so. We have them outnumbered." The Lannisters bristled at the insult. Their captain snarled, "You northern dogs! The rock has never fallen, and it won't fall tonight." Before Robb could respond, an arrow whistled from behind him, lodging in one of the Lannisters' throats. A second arrow took another soldier in the face. Chaos reigned again as the Great John charged, leading a wedge of Northmen into the shield wall. Spears thrust. Some found flesh, others clanged off armor. Men roared in pain and fury. Robb advanced behind them, sword raised, parrying a halberd strike. He pushed in, slashing at an exposed gap in the guard's armor. The man went down with a cry. A ring of Lannisters folded in on Robb, jabbing and shouting. But Grey Wind leapt to his side, savaging one guard's leg. Another guard reeled from an arrow in the chest. Suddenly, the line broke. The Great John shoved the shattered shield wall aside, carving down the last few men who stood in his way. Robb took a steadying breath, adrenaline coursing. "Open the gate!" he shouted, pointing to the iron chain. One of his men, a lithe Riverlander, rushed forward to crank the mechanism. The chain rattled as the portcullis began to rise. A horn blast sounded outside, and the rest of Robb's army surged through the opening. What had been a small force infiltrating from within swelled into a torrent of armed Northmen and rivermen flooding the courtyard. Shouts of triumph rose amid the clang of steel. The courtyard was theirs. Casterly Rock was not yet fully conquered. Robb knew the fortress was vast and would have pockets of resistance. But they had the main gate, and that was the lion's death knell. He did not allow himself to rest. Clear every corridor, every tower. Bring the Lannisters to me. Their officers, their ladies. Spare those who yield. Some men looked disappointed. Vengeance ran hot. But Robb repeated, "Spare those who yield." His father's memory would not allow him to kill surrendering foes in cold blood. And so the chaos spilled through the fortress. With the gates open, Lannister defenders realized the keep was lost from inside and out. Some barricaded themselves in storerooms or halls. Others threw down their arms. A few tried to flee deeper into the rock's labyrinth. The Northmen hunted them from chamber to chamber, accompanied by the howls of deerwolves. With Grey Wind leading the pack, little mercy was shown to those who continued to fight. The night wore on, lit by flickering torches and the glow of braziers. Robb found himself charging down corridors he had never seen, turning corners to discover tapestries older than King Aerys. At one junction, near a small sept, a cluster of Lannister knights made a final stand. They were fierce, taking a toll on Robb's men. One knight managed to slice Edmure Tully's arm before going down, and Edmure hissed in pain, cursing. But after a few frantic minutes, that last pocket of resistance fell. Bodies and blood stained the polished floors, a testament to the ugly side of victory. Near dawn, Robb stood in the great hall of Casterly Rock. Here, the architecture astounded him even in the grim aftermath of battle. Massive pillars soared to an arched ceiling, and the entire chamber was carved and gilded in places, reminiscent of the wealth that was said to emanate from the Lannisters' fabled gold mines beneath. Tall windows faced west, though the dark sky only showed the faintest hint of morning's approach. Rows of carved lion heads seemed to stare down, as if in silent condemnation or rage at the invaders. The hall was filled with Northmen, battered but exultant. The Great John was near the dais, laughing raucously with some other lords. Roose Bolton stood off to one side, expression inscrutable, quietly wrapping a bandage around a small cut on his hand. Edmure Tully was being tended to by a maester they'd found cowering in a corner. The air smelled of sweat, blood, and smoke from overturned braziers. Robb walked to the center of the hall, Grey Wind at his side. In one part of him, he felt relief that the fortress had fallen without an even greater cost in lives. In another part, he felt the heavy presence of what came next. They had broken the pride of House Lannister by capturing their seat of power. Tyrion Lannister was rumored to be in King's Landing, along with Cersei and Joffrey. Tywin was still in the field. Jaime was presumably still a prisoner in the north or with the Rivermen, depending on how fast word traveled. Yet, here was the rock, in northern hands. There was a sudden commotion near the entrance, and some men dragged a figure forward, his rich velvet tunic torn, his face bruised. A half-dozen guards, all with the lion crest, were hauled in as well. The battered man with a bruise blossoming on his cheek was Kevan Lannister, Tywin's brother. He still bore himself with dignity, though fear flickered in his eyes. One of the captors spat. "Found him cowering in a bedchamber, Your Grace." He eyed Kevan with contempt, called out a dozen curses at us until we had him pinned. Kevan lifted his chin. "My men fought bravely. I would have done the same if I saw any hope in it. But the fortress is taken. You Starks have no honor, coming here like thieves in the night." "And now?" Robb's voice was quiet but firm. "We fight as war demands, and we have more honor than House Lannister showed my father. You are my prisoner, my lord." Kevan's jaw tensed, but he nodded stiffly. "So it seems." Robb regarded the group of captives. There were a few well-born Lannister cousins, a handful of knights, and Kevan. Lancel Lannister was nowhere to be seen, perhaps still in King's Landing. As dawn's first rays crept through the western windows, painting the hall in pallid light, Robb Stark, king in the north, claimed the rock. He issued quick orders: round up the prisoners, secure them in a guarded tower. Treat the wounded. Search the fortress for stragglers. Let the maesters do their work, but keep them under watch. He would have no cunning potions used against his men. The Northmen and Rivermen, though exhilarated, were weary. They had spent the entire night fighting. A hush of exhaustion settled over them. A small contingent set about disposing of the dead, clearing bodies from the halls. The scale of it turned Robb's stomach. Each corpse had once been someone, a friend, a son, a father. Even Lannisters had families who would mourn them. But such was the price of war. He suppressed the pang of guilt and pressed on. As the morning sun fully rose, Robb made his way toward the west walls, accompanied by the Great John, Roose Bolton, and a dozen more lords. He wanted to see the seat of Lannister power from the vantage of its lofty walls, to witness the sea crashing below in the morning light. And so he stood, hair ruffled by salt wind, gazing out across the swirling waters of the sunset sea. Far below, gulls wheeled among the cliffs, their mournful cries echoing up to the ramparts. "Magnificent, in its own way," murmured Roose Bolton, stepping forward. The Great John folded his arms, the sea breeze tugging at his bushy beard. "It's ours now, though, so it loses some of that lion's luster, eh?" Robb stared at the horizon, heart heavy. "Eh," he said after a moment. "We have it. But the Lannisters yet live. Tywin remains in the field, and the boy King Joffrey sits on the Iron Throne. This war is far from over." "None. But we have cut out their heart," insisted one of the Northmen behind him. "We've taken their ancestral seat. What can Tywin do but rage?" Robb nodded. He will rage, but House Lannister is not just this castle. They are gold mines and bannermen and cunning alliances. We must use this advantage carefully. Roose Bolton let out a soft, measured breath. An advantage is only as strong as how it's wielded. This is a powerful symbol, Your Grace. What do you intend to do with it? Robb hesitated, then turned to face them. It was the Lannisters who put my father to death, who tormented my sisters, who tried to break my house. The men expect a heavy retribution. I mean to give it to them. Let the realm see what happens to those who wrong the North. He caught Bolton's gaze. We will burn the lion's name from the rock. There shall be no comfort left for them here. Silence followed his words, broken only by the distant crashing of waves. The Great John nodded approvingly, and some others echoed his satisfaction. Roose Bolton's face remained sphinx-like, but his voice was steady. As you wish, Your Grace. Orders were relayed. Fires were lit in the great halls, in the storerooms, in every chamber that had once belonged to the Lannisters. The tapestries emblazoned with the golden lion were torn down, fed to the flames. Statues of proud lions, rearing up on marble plinths, were smashed. Any artifacts of Lannister history, grand tomes in the library, genealogies, trophies from battles, were systematically destroyed. Some men took trophies themselves, mocking the pride of House Lannister by desecrating the memory of it. Robb's bannermen spared the storerooms of any essential supplies, grain, salt, water, those they needed to hold the fortress, for they had no intention of relinquishing Casterly Rock anytime soon. But the keep's valuables, paintings, sculptures, gold ornaments, were carried away in wagons or simply thrown into the sea. Robb did not lust for the Lannisters' gold, but he refused to allow it to remain under their name. Let it be scattered, lost, turned into plunder. As the day wore on, thick black smoke billowed from the chimneys and windows. The once pristine halls reeked of char and ash. Walls that had stood for centuries unscarred now bore black scorch marks. Men and women who had served House Lannister for generations cowered in corners or tried to flee, only to be corralled by northern guards. Robb had given orders to spare those who did not resist, and so many were simply forced out, made to sit in the courtyard, shaking with fear and shock as the wolves of the north devoured their home. Lord Kevan Lannister was brought before Robb in the blackened remains of the great hall. Smoke curled in the rafters. Ash and debris littered the once gleaming floor. A swirl of cinders and soot stained every surface. Kevan's eyes darted around, stricken by the magnitude of the destruction. The dire wolf, Grey Wind, stood near Robb, fixing the prisoner with a baleful stare. Kevan tried to maintain some composure. I thought you would hold the rock as your seat, Your Grace. He coughed slightly, the smoke irritating his lungs. You are defiling it. Why? Robb's eyes were cold. The Lannister name is a blight on the realm. You took my father, threatened my sisters, wrought suffering on every corner of Westeros. You wanted the North to bend the knee. Instead, you will learn that the North does not forgive. I mean to burn your legacy from these stones. Them? Kevan's fists tightened at his sides. This is monstrous. My father's execution was monstrous. The Red Wedding, arranged by your brood, was monstrous. Robb's voice trembled with fury and sorrow. Yes, I know Walder Frey was a part of it. But the Lannisters' hand was there. We found proof enough. We are beyond the time for mercy. Kevan wanted to retort, but he held his tongue. Robb wondered if the man had some shred of guilt, or if it was merely fear. Robb looked down at Grey Wind, who growled softly. You will remain my prisoner, Lord Kevan. Obey, and I will treat you fairly by the laws of war. Resist, and I will not hesitate to end you. Kevan glared but gave a curt, exhausted nod. I understand. Guards hauled Kevan away, escorting him to a cell in one of the towers that was not yet blackened with soot. Robb exhaled, letting a spasm of fatigue wash over him. The day had been long, the cost dear. He glanced around at the blackened hall, walls scorched by flame. Tapestries that once boasted bright gold and crimson lions lay in piles of ashes. In his mind, he saw his father's face, Eddard Stark, as he had last seen him in King's Landing, calm in the face of betrayal. He remembered how the Lannisters had scorned his father's honor, and how that had set the North ablaze in righteous fury. This was how vengeance looked. It was not a bright, shining victory. It was ash on the tongue, a stinging reek in the nostrils, and blood on the stones. Night fell again, and Robb took stock of his forces. The rock was firmly in his grip. They had lost fewer men than he'd feared, though the toll was not light. Some men were beyond saving, and the screams of the wounded echoed down scorched corridors. Maesters, both those who had come with Robb and those found in the fortress, tended the injured. Meanwhile, the fire still smoldered in some wings of the castle. Northmen patrolled the perimeter, ensuring no surprise assaults would come from outside. The Lannister bannermen in the western hills might try to rally once they learned their stronghold had fallen, but Robb doubted any immediate force would strike. The shock alone might keep them at bay. Exhausted beyond measure, Robb found a half-charred solar that had once belonged to Lord Tywin. A table and chairs remained, though the tall windows were cracked, letting in the cold ocean air. He sank into a chair, cradling his head in his hands. Gray wind settled at his feet, ever watchful. Moments later, his mother, Catelyn Stark, appeared. She had arrived after the initial infiltration, having come through the gates once the fortress was secured. She looked older than her years, her face lined with worry. She frowned at the smell of smoke. "Robb," she said quietly, stepping close to place a hand on his shoulder. "The men have told me what you've done. It's quite a sight out there." He raised his head slowly. "Mother, I did what had to be done." She sighed. "I know you feel that. And truly, House Lannister has much to answer for. But I've seen the black clouds rising from the towers. It feels like we're sowing seeds of hatred that may never die." Bitterness twisted his features. "They kindled that hatred themselves. We are simply reminding them that the North remembers." Catelyn slipped into a seat beside him. "You are king in the North now. Your decisions weigh on thousands of souls. What we do here will echo for generations, burning their tapestries, destroying their name. It is a heavy retribution. But do you fear you're losing yourself, bit by bit, in this vengeance?" He looked away, gaze falling on the battered table. "Fear? I carry it with me every moment. But I cannot let fear or regret deter me. If I show weakness, the realm will swallow us again. This war is a matter of survival for the North. If the Lannisters remain strong, they will continue to harm our people. If we cripple them here, we might ensure a peace that lasts." Nendatral. She gazed at her son with deep concern, but said only, "You must tread carefully." He nodded, feeling the weight of the crown on his head, an invisible circle of steel that never rested. "I will." In the following days, Robb set about solidifying his hold on the rock. Troops were stationed in every tower, every gatehouse. Northmen and rivermen patrolled the labyrinthine halls, ensuring no hidden passages offered refuge to rebellious Lannisters. Kevan Lannister, along with the other highborn prisoners, was placed under constant guard. Soldiers loyal to House Stark oversaw the distribution of food. Ravens were sent out, proclaiming to the west and to the entire realm that Casterly Rock now belonged to the king in the north, and that any who still pledged fealty to the Lannisters should lay down their arms or face destruction. Word began to trickle back. Local lords of the Westerlands were in uproar. Some refused to believe the news. Others were terrified. A few, seeing the writing on the wall, sought terms to keep their lands intact. They were met with a cold demand: swear fealty to King Robb or be treated as enemies. The Lannisters' hold on the west was unraveling. Meanwhile, inside the fortress, the destruction of the Lannister legacy continued. The men took a grim satisfaction in rooting out every last lion crest or golden ornament, throwing them onto bonfires in the courtyard. Robb oversaw some of these burnings, keeping his expression impassive. The Grey John, leading the men, hollered each time a new relic of the Lannisters went up in flames. The air became thick with black smoke and the stench of burnt fabric and scorched metal. Yet as Robb walked the corridors, he could not shake a gnawing hollowness. Vengeance had a certain sweet note when he had dreamt of it, but in reality, it was acrid. Perhaps it was the memory of all he had lost. Perhaps it was the knowledge that even this triumph would not bring Ned Stark back, would not undo the Red Wedding, would not magically free Sansa, or fix all that was broken in the realm. He could only move forward. Some nights, he took Grey Wind to prowl the battlements. The keep was quiet but never calm. The unsteady flicker of torchlight revealed blackened walls, charred timbers, and battered stone. Once golden corridors were now dark with soot. The ominous smell of ruin lingered everywhere. The sea winds howled around the towers, mixing with the restless moans of wounded men in the infirmary. Robb's own men muttered that the castle was haunted by the ghosts of lions. One such night, as he looked out over the moonlit sea, a quiet voice said, "Your Grace." It was Roose Bolton, appearing seemingly out of thin air, his pale eyes glinting in the moonlight. Robb turned. "Lord Bolton." Bolton stepped forward, resting his forearms on the stone merlon. He gazed at the sea, as if looking for something in its black depths. "There are rumors, Your Grace, that Tywin Lannister has received word of our conquest and is mustering an army in the Riverlands. Some say he might try to retake his seat." Robb's mouth twitched. "Let him try. We're well fortified here, and he's far from his base of power now." Bolton's tone was distant. "He is also furious, by all accounts. Dangerous. A cornered lion." A cornered lion indeed. Robb remembered Tywin's ruthlessness, how he had orchestrated the downfall of House Rain, flooding their minds and erasing their name in bloody infamy. Now Robb was doing something similar, burning the Lannister name from their stronghold. A part of him recognized a dark parallel. That chilled him. "We will meet him on the field if we must, but Casterly Rock is ours, at least for now." Bolton inclined his head. "As you say, Your Grace." They stood in silence a moment, the distant surf booming against the cliff. Then Bolton said softly, "I have a mind to send out detachments to secure some of the major gold mines in the region. Without those resources, the Lannisters lose their greatest strength. Will you approve?" Robb considered. "Yes. Take men you trust. Keep them well armed, well supplied. We cannot let the mines slip through our fingers or be destroyed by retreating Lannister forces." Bolton gave a small smile, ghostly in the moonlight. "Very good, Your Grace. I will see to it." Then with a bow, he slipped away, leaving Robb to the night. Time moved strangely in the aftermath. Robb found himself issuing commands day after day, receiving ravens, negotiating with frightened Westerlands lords, all the while a heavy knot of tension coiled in his gut. He expected Tywin's reprisal at any moment. The nights were the worst, when the fortress fell silent, but for the groans of the wounded and the hiss of the ocean wind. Grey Wind stayed close, sensing his master's unease. And then the day came when the watchers on the wall spotted a column of riders approaching, banners snapping in the breeze. At first many feared it was Tywin with a vanguard. But as the riders drew nearer, they raised a plain white flag. A messenger was allowed inside. He carried a sealed parchment, the wax stamp bearing the Lannister lion, but with a black slash across it, as if in mourning. Robb read it in the presence of his lords. The gist was clear enough. Tywin Lannister demanded the immediate release of Kevan Lannister and all Lannister kin, the return of Casterly Rock, and an end to what he called Northern vandalism. In exchange, he offered to discuss hostages for Sansa Stark and any other demands the Northerners might have. He closed by threatening that if Robb refused, Tywin would muster all his might and starve the north of trade, would burn the Riverlands again, would spare no cost in ensuring House Stark was eradicated. The Great John spat on the floor. "Discuss? That old lion has no intention of releasing Sansa or giving us any peace. He just wants us to yield him his seat back so he can mount our heads on spikes later." Robb agreed. It reeked of false promises and intimidation. Yet the mention of Sansa twisted his heart. He pictured his younger sister in King's Landing, or wherever she might be, possibly at the mercy of Joffrey. The notion of ransoming Kevan for Sansa flickered through his mind. But then again, Tywin's words were menacing, demanding. He had learned the Lannisters cunning the hardest way. They would betray him the instant they saw an opportunity. He let the note drop. We will not relinquish the rock, nor will we treat with Tywin on such terms. If he wants his fortress back, he can come and try to take it. That settled it. A reply was penned, short and curt. The North remembers, and we do not fear you. We hold the rock, and we will burn every last trace of the lion if you persist in this war. Return Sansa Stark at once if you value your kinsmen's lives. The messenger rode off, pale-faced. Whether Tywin would see reason or act in rage was anyone's guess. But if Tywin did intend to come at them immediately, he did not appear as quickly as anticipated. Ravens brought word that he was still gathering men, that King's Landing was in turmoil over rumors of the Lannisters losing their greatest seat, that Joffrey was outraged, that the Tyrells were pressing for alliances, that Stannis Baratheon's threat still loomed. The realm was fracturing under the weight of multiple wars, and the North's victory at Casterly Rock only exacerbated that chaos. As weeks stretched on, Robb settled into the fortress like a new overlord, uneasy though he felt. The battered walls were partially repaired, the fires had died away, though traces of black soot remained on nearly every surface. The great hall had become a grim throne room of sorts, where Robb received envoys perched on a seat once used by the Lannisters. The seat itself had been stripped of its lion motifs, leaving it a cold stone chair. And though the gold had once glittered in these halls, now it seemed everything was tinted by gray ash. Still, the men tried to find bits of merriment, as soldiers often do after victory. They drank stolen wine from the Lannister cellars, feasted on salted meats, boasted of the night they took the rock. But the mood never fully shook the tension. Everyone expected Tywin's hammer to fall. Meanwhile, some muttered that the war was drifting aimlessly, that the king in the north should strike again while the west was reeling. Others argued they should consolidate their power in the west, secure the gold mines. Amid these debates, Robb felt more and more the isolation of command. Each day, his mother and he would speak in hushed tones about Sansa, Arya, the uncertain fates in King's Landing. Sometimes Catelyn would press for negotiations, for any possible trade that might ensure Sansa's safety. Robb's rage burned cold, but the love for his family never dimmed. He wrestled with the possibility that he could use Kevan Lannister as leverage, but fear of Tywin's deception made him hesitate. Each raven from King's Landing contained only more threats or hollow offers. One evening, the great Jon and Roose Bolton approached him in Lord Tywin's old solar, where Robb stared at maps by candlelight. They spoke in lowered voices. The great Jon insisted they should ride out, raid Lannisport, gather ships, and push forward to secure the entire coastline. Bolton recommended a more cautious approach, focusing on forging alliances with the lesser lords of the Westerlands, bringing them under the northern banner before Tywin could regroup. Robb listened, weary. They were right, both of them in different ways. If they pressed too far, they risked overextending. If they stayed idle, Tywin might slip the noose. At length, Robb said, "We'll send an envoy to Lannisport, with men enough to take control of the harbor if possible. If the local lordling refuses, we'll blockade. And Bolton, see if you can draw in some western houses. Offer them leniency if they swear to me. Let them keep their lands if they renounce Tywin. We break the lion's support bit by bit." Both men agreed to carry out his orders. As they turned to go, the Greyjohn glanced at the blackened walls, the half-burned tapestry scraps that still clung to a corner. "We truly have undone the rock, haven't we?" Robb nodded. "Yes." House Lannister will never forget what happened here. Alone, Robb lingered over the table, running a finger across the Westerlands map. "Die." He paused at the small depiction of Casterly Rock perched by the sea. Once, it had likely seemed invincible to the men who charted these maps. Now, with the lion's name burned from its ramparts and halls, it stood a monument to northern resolve, or to northern fury. Weeks turned to months. The warm season waned, giving way to autumn's cooler winds. The castle stench of burned tapestry and singed stone eventually faded, replaced by the subtle dampness of the sea air. Robb's men had settled in like a pack of wolves who had made a den of the lion's lair. Kevan Lannister languished in captivity, allowed some comfort but forever shadowed by guards. Word arrived of skirmishes in the Riverlands, where Tywin was indeed rallying men, though slower than expected. The crown was embroiled in other conflicts, especially with rumors of Stannis' sea power. The Tyrells, though allied with King's Landing, had grown wary of joining Tywin's every cause. The realm was fracturing and alliances too tangled to untie easily. Among the small folk of the West, fear and resentment festered. Some had turned to the new overlords in hopes of peace and coin. Others quietly longed for the day the lions returned to cast out these northern usurpers. Robb's men tried to maintain some semblance of order, but friction was inevitable. Brigands roamed the countryside, some spurred by hunger, others by vengeance. All the while Robb's mother pleaded with him about Sansa area, how to secure their freedom. Robb wrote letter after letter, each more forceful than the last, to King's Landing and to Tyrion Lannister, who had a reputation for cunning. He demanded his sister's release, threatened to further dismantle the West if the Lannisters did not comply. The replies were unsatisfactory. Vague claims that the girls were safe, that negotiations must happen under Tywin's supervision, that the North's aggression invalidated any such talk. Robb's heart grew heavier with each passing day. He had avenged his father, struck a blow against House Lannister's pride. But the cost had not ended. He walked the blackened corridors of Casterly Rock, listening to the echo of his bootsteps, wondering if this was indeed the justice he had longed for, or merely the beginning of a new cycle of violence. He had done what he set out to do, taken the rock, burned the Lannister name from it, proven the might of the North. But he had not freed his sisters or ended the war. Instead, he had escalated it. On a day of biting winds and iron-gray clouds, a raven arrived bearing a message from King's Landing. It was from Tyrion, in his capacity as the Hand of the King, though how long he might hold that position was unclear. The letter was short and pointed. "You have done the unthinkable, Stark. My father is a man of limited patience, and you have tested it greatly. Rest assured, if you do not release my uncle and return Casterly Rock, you will suffer the full force of King Joffrey's wrath." Robb read it twice, passing it to Catelyn. She pursed her lips, then said, "Tyrion is cunning, but he is not blind. He sees how precarious their position is. This is bluster." Robb tossed the letter aside. That's all they have left, it seems. But a small part of him quivered with foreboding. Tywin's reputation was no idle boast. He would come, and it would be savage. By now, the rock was ringed with formidable defenses manned by Robb's host. He had tripled the watch on the walls, braced every gate, posted scouts for miles around. Lannisport was under partial blockade, threatened by Northman ships that Stannis' allies had helped Robb procure. The gold mines had been seized or destroyed if they resisted. In short, House Lannister was reeling, but it was not yet dead. A hush fell over the fortress as the next moon cycle approached. Reports whispered that Tywin was on the march with a fearsome host, determined to retake his seat at any cost. The men at Casterly Rock readied for a siege. Some corners of the castle were still charred from Robb's initial cleansing, but new barricades and fortifications had been erected. The Great John joked grimly that they should have left the halls unburned, so that the Lannisters would have less trouble making themselves comfortable. "But let them come," he said. "We'll meet them with steel and arrow." The day came at last when the horns blew along the walls. A line of banners appeared on the horizon, shimmering in the late autumn sun. Crimson and gold, the proud Lion of Lannister, flanked by the sigils of lesser Westerland houses. Thousands of men, horsemen by the hundreds. Ziga towers in the distance. Tywin had come to reclaim his legacy. Robb stood upon the ramparts with Grey Wind, his mother, and his lords. Far below, the Lannister host spread out across the plains leading to the western gate. The great Lord Tywin himself must be there, hidden in the throng. Robb's breath caught. This was it. The final test of House Stark's claim on the rock. Would the walls hold? Could they outlast Tywin's siege? Or would Tywin break them, as he had broken so many foes before? Archers lined the battlements, crossbows at the ready. Boiling pitch was prepared in cauldrons. The men were disciplined, if tired. Robb raised his voice to deliver final instructions. "Hold fast. Do not waste arrows. Let them come close, then unleash hell." The great Jun raised a cheer among the troops, brandishing his sword. A hush descended as the Lannister vanguard approached the gates, offering one final parley. Their herald shouted up, "Open the gates and surrender the fortress in the name of King Joffrey Baratheon and Lord Tywin Lannister, Warden of the West, or face utter destruction." No one on the walls answered at first. Then Robb himself stepped forward, a swirling wind catching his cloak. He called down, voice echoing over the silent field, "The North does not yield. If Lord Tywin wishes to parley, let him come forth. But we will never again bow to the lions." Murmurs swept through the Lannister ranks. After a moment, a small detachment trotted forward. Their standard-bearer carried the golden lion. At their head was Tywin Lannister himself. Stern, pale, cold-eyed. The distance was enough that Robb could not read every flicker of expression, but he sensed Tywin's grim fury. Tywin's voice carried up, "Boy, you have made a grievous error. Release my brother. Return my lands, my castle. Bend the knee, or your sister will suffer, and your precious north shall burn as Harrenhal once burned. I will exterminate your line, root and stem." Then shall. Robb's heart pounded. He imagined Sansa in a dungeon, at Joffrey's mercy. He thought of his father's head on a spike, of the Red Wedding, of all the men who had died so far. And he found no room for fear, only a steely resolve. "I will not yield," he replied, his voice cutting through the hush. "Casterly Rock is mine now, taken in just war. You have only yourselves to blame for the enmity of the North." Tywin's face remained impassive. "Very well," he said. He turned his horse and rode back to the safety of his lines, raising one armored hand. The horn blew again, and a great roar went up from the Lannister host. Soldiers advanced, siege engines rolling across the plains. Within moments, the first arrows and bolts whizzed through the air from both sides, a deadly exchange that blackened the sky. Robb's men returned fire, loosing hails of arrows from the battlements. The war horns howled, and the thunder of catapults shook the air. Stones crashed against the walls, sending chips of rock flying. Men shouted, "To cover!" Fired again. The battle for Casterly Rock had begun in earnest. Robb crouched behind a merlon as an arrow clattered off stone nearby. He grimaced. "Return fire," he commanded. "Aim for their siege crews." The Northmen's archers targeted the men hauling the heavy catapults, while crossbowmen on Tywin's side tried to pick off defenders. An intense chorus of twangs and thuds and screams filled the air. Smoke began to curl where flaming pitch ignited dry grass on the field below. Grey Wind snarled, pacing behind the battlement. Catelyn pressed herself against the rampart, fear etched across her features. Robb urged her back. "Mother, go to the keep. It's safer there." "Dendo." She shook her head, but the Grey John coaxed her away. Reluctantly, she allowed them to guide her from the front lines. Robb refocused on the attack, scanning for signs of Tywin's main push. The Lannisters were determined, well-equipped, but the rock was formidable. Robb had spent months fortifying it further. Boiling pitch poured down on the first wave of men at the gates, and their screams were drowned by the clash of steel. Rams battered the great gates, which shook under the impact but held for now. Roose Bolton's men rained stones and arrows down from the murder holes, driving the attackers back. Yet the Lannisters kept coming, wave after wave, a steady push of red and gold. For hours, the battle raged, neither side giving quarter. Twice the Lannisters attempted to scale the walls with ladders. Twice they were repelled by the defenders, who toppled the ladders back or cut them down with axes. Bodies littered the field. The air was thick with the acrid tang of burning pitch, the coppery stench of blood, and the roiling fear that underpinned every war. Amid the chaos, Robb Stark fought tirelessly, moving along the ramparts, encouraging his men, loosing arrows himself when necessary. He could not deny that House Lannister was throwing everything into this assault. Tywin's wrath was tangible, hammered into every blow of the rams at the gate, every flaming missile launched at the walls. Night approached once more, and still the fight wore on. Torches dotted the field like fireflies, and the Lannister siege engines continued their relentless pounding. The gates were battered, the walls scarred, but still they held. In the darkness, northern archers could pick off the shapes of attackers by the glow of distant fires. Screams and curses echoed. The moan of the wounded rose around the castle's perimeter. Eventually, near midnight, the horns blew again on Tywin's side, signaling a withdrawal. The Lannisters pulled back, leaving piles of dead. As the dust settled, Robb's men sagged with exhaustion, some collapsing where they stood. The cost was immense on both sides. The once proud gates of Casterly Rock bore cracks and splinters, though they remained upright. Sections of wall had crumbled in places, but the fortress still stood. Robb gazed out over the battlefield, heart clenching. Torches revealed a sea of motion. Men dragging the wounded, retrieving the dead, reforming lines. In a lull of the night wind, he could hear faint sobs and whimpers. This was the ugly face of war once again. How many times would he see it before this ended? Dawn brought a new assault. With the sun came Tywin's renewed determination. A hail of flaming arrows lashed the battlements. A siege tower rumbled forward, shielded by arrow barrages. Robb's men tried to set it alight, but the Lannisters had covered it in rawhide soaked in vinegar. It inched closer, and from its top, crossbowmen picked off defenders on the walls. In a fury, the Great John led a sortie. He and a band of Northmen pushed out from the battered gate, surprising the Lannisters. They hewed down the men escorting the siege tower, set it aflame with torches. A roar went up from the defenders as the contraption collapsed in smoke. But those men who had ventured out soon found themselves encircled by Lannister cavalry. Retreating back to the gate cost them dearly. The Great John returned, bloodied and limping, carrying a wounded comrade over his shoulder. Roose Bolton's detachments held the southern walls, repelling repeated ladder attacks. Everywhere was a swirl of blood and fire. Robb saw arrow slits jammed with broken shafts, parapets dripping red. By noon, it was clear the Lannisters were intent on continuing the onslaught until the rock fell, or they died trying. A sense of bitter pride steadied Robb's men. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to surrender now. They had taken this fortress and burned the Lion's name from its halls. They would not give it back. And so they fought with the desperation of men defending their very cause. The sun set in a blaze of crimson behind the fortress, painting the battlefield the color of blood. Tywin's horns blew again. Another partial retreat. Sporadic fighting continued into the twilight, but the major assault ceased. As Robb gazed from the ramparts, chest heaving, he could see the Lannister camp sprawling across the plains like a wound on the land. Tents, torches, roaming pickets. Tywin would not give up. He would starve them out, tear down the walls eventually, if not today, then tomorrow, or a month from now. In the courtyard below, wounded men lay on pallets. A few feebly raised arms for water, for a maester, for mercy. Grey wind paced among them, a silent sentinel. Robb felt something inside him break at the sight. This was the cost of their vengeance, a cost he had deemed necessary. But was it truly the only path? He closed his eyes, recalling the moment he had stood in these halls, and ordered the burning of all Lannister relics. Had that savage act spurred Tywin to extremes that might yet doom them all? He pushed the doubt aside. War demanded brutality. The Lannisters had shown none. They had orchestrated Ned's death, the Red Wedding. They would have done worse to the north if given the chance. Yet Robb could not quiet the turmoil in his heart. He descended from the walls to check on the men, to see if the great gates could be reinforced any further, to speak with the maesters about the wounded. Leadership was a burden that allowed no rest. Thus the siege stretched on for days. In some intervals, Tywin's men tried to sap the walls or fling diseased corpses over them. The defenders endured, rationing food, patching the battered gates. Summer was all but gone, and the threat of winter loomed. Morale began to waver, but whenever a man spoke of surrender, the Great John or Roose Bolton reminded him of the North's cause. Robb's mother prayed in the scorched sept for Sansa's safety, and for some resolution that did not end with the wholesale slaughter of both sides. One frigid morning, under a slate-gray sky, a miracle of sorts occurred. Scouts reported Tywin's main host was stirring, as if preparing for another large-scale assault. But then horns sounded from the east. Another army appeared on the horizon, bearing the flaming heart of Stannis Baratheon. Word spread like wildfire. Stannis had come west, perhaps to strike at the Lannisters while their main strength was pinned in a siege. A cunning move, or a timely coincidence. The Lannister camp erupted in confusion. Tywin's men, attacked on two fronts, scrambled to reform lines. Within hours, the battlefield outside Casterly Rock had become a chaotic melee, with Stannis' forces hammering the Lannisters from the flank. The watchers on the walls cheered, though some warily noted that Stannis was no friend to the north either. Still, an enemy of Tywin was a temporary ally of sorts. Seeing an opening, Robb led his men in a sortie from the rock, smashing into the panicked Lannister lines from the front while Stannis struck from the flank. Great chaos reigned. Tywin's horns rang out in desperate counterattacks, but his army was caught in a pincer. The ground shook with cavalry charges, the clang of steel on steel, and the roar of flames as Stannis' red priests brandished their fiery sigils. Some Lannisters tried to flee north, only to be cut down by outriders. Others formed defensive pockets that fought valiantly. Robb glimpsed Tywin in the distance, a grim figure on a war horse, rallying his bannermen. The old lion fought fiercely, but even his legendary command could not undo the trap he had fallen into. The field ran red. Trumpets blared. Soldiers died in droves. When the sun dipped behind the rock, the battle was all but decided. Tywin's once proud army lay broken. Survivors fleeing into the hills or else surrendering. Stannis' men, exhausted and blood-stained, claimed victory. Robb's forces had also paid a heavy price in the fighting, but they stood triumphant upon the field. Casterly Rock loomed above, battered yet defiant. In the aftermath, Robb paced amid the carnage, searching for signs of Tywin. Word came that he had been seen galloping away with a small retinue. The old lion had slipped the net. For now. Bodies of men and horses littered the plains, and the stench of death was overpowering. Small fires flickered in the dusk, and the moans of the dying rose like a chorus of lament. Then, Stannis arrived, cutting a solitary figure on his war horse, accompanied by a few loyal knights. He reined in before Robb, his jaw set, eyes flinty. Tension hummed in the air. They had fought a common enemy, but that did not make them allies. King in the north, Stannis said, inclining his head stiffly. You have done what none thought possible, taking the rock and holding it. Now Tywin is on the run. The Iron Throne is mine by rights, and I have come to ensure the usurpers and their Lannister dogs are destroyed. Will you kneel to me, or continue as an independent rebel? No. Robb surveyed him, seeing the stern lines of his face. We have no love for King's Landing, he said slowly. We declared our independence because the Lannisters murdered my father, among other crimes. We mean to keep that freedom. If you intend to supplant Joffrey, that is your war. The North seeks no new overlord. Stannis' mouth pressed into a thin line. Then we remain separate kingdoms for the moment. But there may be cause for an alliance, if you see sense. I have men, you have territory. Together, we could end the Lannisters once and for all. End. Robb said nothing immediately, thinking of Sansa, of the possibility that an alliance with Stannis might help free her. If Stannis took King's Landing, he might deliver Joffrey to justice. And what then for the Lannisters who remained? Would the North truly find peace at last? The battlefield wind sighed, carrying the reek of blood. Robb looked up at Casterly Rock, the seat of House Lannister, blackened by his hand, battered by war, and now overshadowed by the improbable arrival of Stannis Baratheon. He had come so far, from the boy who had raced through the courtyards of Winterfell, to the king in the north who had burned the name of the lions from their fortress. He had no illusions that the realm's troubles were ended. But for this moment at least, Tywin Lannister was routed. The rock belonged to the wolf. He turned to Stannis, exhaustion weighing on every word. We'll speak of alliances. But know this. The North will never bow again. And Casterly Rock is ours, reclaimed from the ashes of the lion. Then no. Stannis studied him, gaze unyielding. Then, Let us see if your wolf's claws and my flaming sword can shape a new order in the realm." Night fell, quiet and grim, over the smoldering ruins of the battlefield. Casterly Rock stood sentinel, the battered monument to a young king's impossible victory, and the vow he had taken to destroy the house that had wronged him so gravely. The lion's roar had been silenced for a time, its name cast upon the flames. Whether that fire would herald a lasting peace or a new chapter of bloodshed, none could yet say. But the North remembered, and the world would not soon forget, the day Robb Stark took Casterly Rock and burned House Lannister's legacy to ash. Night had fully settled by the time Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon ended their terse exchange upon the battlefield beneath Casterly Rock. Beneath that ancient fortress, the plain was littered with the detritus of recent carnage. Broken siege towers smoldered in embers. Craters from fallen boulders marred the earth. Bodies lay scattered, some wearing the crimson and gold of House Lannister, others the rougher leathers of the North or the flaming heart of Stannis Baratheon. The metallic sting of blood mixed with the acrid tang of spent pitch, hovering in the chill autumn air. Robb's breath came ragged. He stood outside the ruined gate, the heavy portcullis still partially raised to allow for the recent sortie. Exhausted Northmen milled around him, those who remained standing, stripping away battered armor to wipe the sweat and grime from their faces. Many men lay wounded, leaning against the castle's stone walls, or on pallets that had been dragged from within. A hush clung to them, an air of stunned disbelief that they still lived after 2 days of brutal siege. Stannis and his small retinue reined their horses a respectable distance from the battered gates. Torches wobbled in the night breeze, casting the new arrivals in lurid orange and black shadow. Stannis himself wore a dented breastplate bearing his sigil, a heart surrounded by stylized flames. The plate was scorched at the edges, as though he had ridden through fire. His eyes were cold, glimmering with an intensity that Robb half recognized in himself, a conviction that all the bloodshed was part of a fated justice. Neither king spoke at first, letting the moment weigh heavy. Stannis' knights eyed Robb's men with clear suspicion, while the Northmen muttered among themselves. Grey Wind prowled near Robb's leg, his hackles faintly raised, uncertain of these new arrivals who smelled of salt and smoke. Finally, the older man lifted his chin and regarded Robb with a soldier's measured gravity. "I do not suffer illusions, King in the North," Stannis said, voice cutting through the gloom. "I did not come to the Westerlands out of mercy for your cause. I did it to break Tywin Lannister while he was cornered, and because my scouts said he'd drawn away from King's Landing. I seized an opportunity to weaken the Iron Throne's false occupant and secure more territory for the true king." Despite his exhaustion, Robb's lips twitched with a wry acknowledgement. "Fair enough. We've no illusions either. We know there's no love lost between us. But we share an enemy in House Lannister, or House Baratheon Lannister, as they style themselves behind Joffrey." "Dun-dun-da." Stannis dismounted stiffly, his joints creaking. He walked across the churned soil, picking his way past corpses with the air of a man used to stepping over obstacles. His knights kept close behind. When he stopped before Robb, they were of nearly equal height. Stannis' face looked carved from stone in the flickering torchlight, lines of grim determination etched into every contour. "Tywin Lannister has fled," the older man said. "But he will rally his survivors, gather fresh levies, and return in time. He always does. This victory is a boon, but not the end. And you, young wolf, intend to hold the rock?" Robb did not look away. "I do. It is a symbol of Lannister power that the North has taken. I mean to keep it until the war is ended in truth. I will not relinquish my father's vengeance." Stannis grunted. "Vengeance has a bitter taste. I know it well." Robb's memories whipped back to the Red Wedding, to Ned's execution, to all the humiliations he had suffered at the Lannisters' hands. "Sometimes bitterness is all that's left," he replied. "You say you are the rightful king of Westeros. Fine. I have declared my independence from the Iron Throne. My men will not bend the knee to you or any other king south of the Neck, but perhaps we can find terms that suit us both for now." A wintry gust ruffled the torn banners behind them. Stannis studied Robb's face, then the ruined gates and blackened walls of Casterly Rock, a fortress that had once been the proud seat of his greatest rival's principal ally. The corners of his mouth tightened in what might have been the faintest flicker of satisfaction. "Very well," Stannis said. "We can speak. I will not sleep on a battlefield of corpses when the castle is right here." Robb paused. It went against every instinct to invite a rival king inside the fortress he had fought so hard to hold, but refusing might risk immediate conflict. His men were in no shape for another stand. And part of him respected Stannis, if only because the man had proven unyielding and purposeful. "We can speak in what remains of the Great Hall," Robb finally said. "Send a small retinue. The rest can make camp in these foothills or on the beach." Stannis gave him a curt nod. "I do not intend betrayal, boy. If I wanted your fortress, I'd have let the Lannisters wear you down and swooped in at the last moment for the prize. But I struck when I did to break Tywin. Now, well, I'm too old for petty double-crossing." "You'll forgive me if I keep my guard up," Robb replied coolly. Stannis almost smiled. "I would expect no less." They parted with little ceremony, each returning to his lines to manage the aftermath. Over the next hours, the stench of death thickened, while men collected the wounded, sorted the dying from the salvageable, and stacked the bodies for a hurried mass burial. The ground was too rocky near the cliffs, so they would dig mass pits in the flatter earth to the east. Many a northern soldier recognized a friend's vacant stare in the mud. Many from Stannis' host discovered the same. But it was among the Lannister forces that the largest toll was counted, a testament to the hammer blow that had landed from both sides. As dawn stretched pale across the sea of the sunset, a grim hush fell. Robb's men, spent from battle, struggled to remain upright. Some propped themselves against the battered gates, or found corners of the courtyard to doze in. Within the keep, small fires burned in braziers, chasing away the damp chill. The once grand halls of House Lannister were battered and blackened from Robb's earlier efforts to eradicate every lion sigil and tapestry. Now, with battered shutters letting in cold drafts, the fortress felt haunted by the ghosts of its proud owners. Robb found Catelyn stark in the solar that had once belonged to Tywin, a tall window opening onto the sea. She stood gazing at the churning waters far below the cliff, her thick auburn hair lifted by the breeze. He approached quietly. Her posture was tense, and her eyes carried sorrow. "We have a fragile moment," she said without turning. "Stannis is no friend, yet he can be a valuable ally, at least so long as his war against Joffrey and the Lannisters continues. But you're right to remain cautious. He fights for his own crown, not for the North's freedom." "Then?" Robb nodded, stepping closer until he felt the sea spray-laden breeze on his face. "I don't trust him. I don't trust anyone but you, Mother, and the men who have bled for me time and again." She gave him a sad smile. "You cannot carry such a burden alone. Even your father, honorable as he was, knew how to make alliances for the greater good. Remember, Robb, if it brings Sansa and Arya home." Her voice faltered. "We must think carefully." Robb looked away, trying to mask the raw ache that bloomed in his chest whenever his sisters came to mind. So far, all attempts to secure them had been stymied. Perhaps if Stannis truly took King's Landing, Sansa might be freed. But it was a slim hope. And the cost of trusting Stannis might be too high. "You should rest," Catelyn urged softly. "The men are exhausted, and you're no different." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I have to meet Stannis first. We're to speak in the Great Hall soon." "Ben?" She laid a hand on his arm, worry etched on her features, but she said nothing further. They stood a moment in silence before Robb turned from the window, leaving her to the crash of the waves below. The Great Hall had been the scene of so much destruction. Chunks of scorched wood and stone littered the corners, though in the weeks of occupation, Robb's men had cleared away the worst of the debris. A wide table had been set near the dais, where Lannister lords once held feasts. Now it bore not gold plate or fine carvings, but battered maps, inkpots, and half-burned candelabras. Northern guards in stark livery ringed the perimeter, leaning on spears or swords, watchful. The atmosphere was tense, laced with the possibility that at any moment, a single misunderstanding could lead to violence. Stannis arrived with a handful of loyal men, among them Lord Davos Seaworth, a spare man with kind eyes and a weathered face. Robb had heard the name, though not the full tale of the so-called Onion Knight. Stannis also brought Melisandre, the Red Priestess whose presence exuded a faint aura of unease. She wore her trademark red robes, her hair a dark swirl. Robb could not help noticing how the torchlight seemed to cling to her like a second skin. There was something otherworldly about her, and Grey Wind growled softly when she drew near. Robb stood at the head of the table with Roose Bolton on one side and the Greatjon on the other. Edmure Tully, wounded but mobile, hovered near. All parted to let Stannis approach, though they did not kneel. Instead, they inclined their heads in a gesture of uneasy respect to a man who styled himself king. Stannis took in the hall in a single sweeping glance, from the blackened walls to the gutted alcoves where once lion-shaped candelabras had been torn down. "You made quite a bonfire of their history, Stark," he remarked with measured disapproval. "You should be wary. In victory, it's easy to become the very thing you despise." Robb stiffened. "I will not be lectured on my methods by a man who follows a fire god and burns any who stands in his way." A flicker of something crossed Stannis' face, but he did not rise to the bait. "We have more pressing matters. Shall we speak of them?" Robb gestured curtly to the table. "We shall." They circled around, lords on both sides, as an uneasy hush fell. Roose Bolton pinned Melisandre with a cold stare, while the Greatjon crossed his thick arms and studied Davos. Edmure stood close enough to support Robb but offered no immediate comment. Torchlight made their shadows stretch across the floor in grotesque shapes, as though reminding them all of the violence that still lay between them. Stannis spoke first. "The realm is fractured. Joffrey squats on the Iron Throne, but his mother and advisors scramble in panic now that Tywin's lost his seat of power. The Tyrells linger uncertain. My brother Renly is dead, the victim of betrayal. That leaves me the rightful claimant, unless you continue to style yourself an independent king in the north." "I do," Robb said plainly. "The South has brought nothing but sorrow to my house. We have no interest in bending the knee again, not to you, nor any other. But we do have an interest in seeing Joffrey unseated, so long as it might ensure my sister's release and keep the Lannisters from ever threatening the North again." "Then?" Stannis' mouth tightened. "You speak of your sisters often. It may be that if I manage to take the capital, I can guarantee their release. But you must give me something in return." Roose Bolton cleared his throat, the soft sound carrying an unsettling resonance. "And what would you ask of the king in the north?" Stannis' gaze swept the room. "Support. Aid. If not your full armies, then at least neutrality when I march on King's Landing. I cannot fight Joffrey and Lannister loyalists on one side while worrying about an attack from you on the other. I offer no illusions that our alliance would be one of convenience. If you prefer to remain an enemy, then so be it. But we might accomplish more together." "Then die." Robb placed both hands on the table. Splinters and scorch marks marred its surface, matching the ruin all around. "We are not so numerous that I can scatter my men across Westeros. I have claimed the rock, but that took a toll. Tywin's host nearly broke us. If not for your arrival, I might be dead." "Damn?" Stannis' jaw set, as though the admission was an encouragement. "Yet you hold it. Your men have the advantage in these western lands, for the local houses are disorganized and fearful. You could reinforce my approach to King's Landing by pressuring the remaining Lannister bannermen. Draw off their strength, make them fear you, so they cannot unite fully under Joffrey." Davos Seaworth spoke gently. "Begging your pardon, your grace, but the young wolf has lost much in this war. Perhaps we should consider any offer of hostages or a formal vow. Let the boy keep his sovereignty if that is what he craves." "Now?" "I am no boy," Robb cut in, though his tone was more mild than angry. He found Davos' manner oddly calming. "But you're right. I crave the safety of my people above all else. I want Sansa and Arya freed. I want the Lannisters' hold on the North severed forever. If you swear not to infringe upon our borders once this war is done, I might consider giving you the neutrality you ask for. In return, you guarantee the release of my sisters if you take the city and dethrone Joffrey." "Mentor." Stannis' eyes narrowed at the phrase. If you take the city. But he swallowed any retort. Very well. If they live, they shall be freed. I do not rule the hearts of Lannisters, but if I break them in battle, I will make your sisters release a condition of surrender. And if Joffrey refuses, Stannis' lips thinned, I will burn him and his mother if need be. She is the cause of so much rot. The Greyjohn released a deep, rolling chuckle. I'd pay good coin to see that. Forgive me, your grace, he added with a toothy grin. But they've earned it. No one contradicted the Greyjohn's grim amusement. So much blood had been spilled in the name of House Lannister that the notion of them tasting flame was hardly unwelcome among the Northerners. Robb, however, tried to keep the conversation on track. If we agree to remain neutral in your fight, will you truly respect our borders after your coronation? You call yourself the one true king of Westeros. You'd be giving up half your kingdom and acknowledging the North's independence. Stannis' gaze flicked to Melisandre briefly, then back. The Lord of Light teaches that there is only one truth. Yet the realm is in pieces. If I must let the North go to achieve the rest, perhaps that is the price. Or perhaps events will unfold that make this conversation moot. He let that hang in the air. Robb gave a short nod, eyes searching Stannis' face for any sign of falsehood. The older man's features were carved with severity, but also with a stern sort of honor, rigid and unyielding. Robb thought of his father's old stories of Stannis, dutiful, stubborn, uncharismatic, but fiercely loyal in his own way. Perhaps that loyalty, once bound to the realm, might allow him to honor a truce with the North. Or perhaps not. War twisted even the noblest intentions. We have an accord then, Robb said at length, though we must formalize it. Stannis was silent a moment, then extended his right hand, still streaked with grime and flecks of dried blood. Shake my hand and seal it, Stark, by the flames of our Allure. Melisandre's voice interjected, low and rich. We seal it with words and with iron, but let it be known that the Lord of Light watches. If you betray your word, the fires will reveal all. A hush fell. Robb's men stirred uneasily. The Greyjohn scowled, and Roose Bolton's face went unreadable. In the torchlight, Melisandre's eyes burned with a peculiar intensity that gave Robb a moment's pause. Grey Wind gave another soft growl, as though smelling something intangible and disquieting. Despite it, Robb clasped Stannis' hand and felt the iron grip of the older man's calloused fingers. So it's done, Robb said quietly, releasing him. Done, Stannis echoed. They hammered out the details over the next few hours, with Lord Davos and Roose Bolton putting certain terms on parchment. It amounted to a simple statement. The king in the north would not move against Stannis Baratheon or his armies while Stannis marched on King's Landing to overthrow Joffrey. Stannis, if victorious, would demand the immediate release of any Stark hostages, on pain of death to the Lannisters. Stannis further swore not to violate the North's borders once the war ended, though the question of the Riverlands was left murky. Robb, after all, had many Riverlords sworn to him, and they might prefer to remain part of the Northern Kingdom or revert to the Southern Crown. It was a conundrum that could wait until the main war was decided. By the time the negotiations concluded, the sky beyond the sundered windows had moved from dawn into the milky haze of late morning. The battered men on both sides were burying corpses or tending to the wounded with stoic efficiency, and a bitter wind whipped in off the sea. Stannis gave orders for his army to rest and resupply briefly near Casterly Rock's foothills, scouring the area for what provisions they could. He expressed an intent to march eastward soon, turning from the west into the Crownlands. That route would take him some time, but presumably the Lannisters' hold would be weakened. Meanwhile, Robb needed to determine how best to secure Casterly Rock from any new threat. Tywin might be broken, but he was not dead, and other Lannister bannermen might yet attempt to rally. After the final handshake, Stannis prepared to depart the Great Hall, Melisandre close by. Robb stepped away from the table, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Outside, men carried torches and tended cooking fires, feeding the living and burning the dead. The Greyjohn pounded Robb's shoulder, grinning wide despite his fatigue. "We're still alive, lad," he said. "And by the gods, we even forced that iron stick of a king to strike a bargain, Not a bad day's work. Robb managed a small smile. We'll see if it was worth the cost. Roose Bolton slid closer, his voice soft as silk. Forgive me, Your Grace, but I'm not certain how I feel about letting the Baratheon pass unopposed. True, we are in no condition to fight them here and now, but an alliance of convenience is a precarious rope to walk. Robb rubbed his forehead. The swirl of so many burdens threatened to drag him under. What choice did we have, Lord Bolton? Another battle out there would have seen us destroyed. And if Stannis does take King's Landing, he may break the Lannisters for good. Then we can focus on the North's freedom. We need Sansa and Arya. This is the best path to that, short of storming King's Landing ourselves, which we cannot do. Nenderau. Bolton's pale eyes flickered. You are correct, of course. My men remain at your command. He bowed smoothly, stepping away. Robb left the great hall, exhaustion soaking into his bones. He ordered that the men stand down from immediate battle readiness, but keep a strong watch. The battered gate was wedged shut again, with repairs underway. Some part of him doubted Stannis would try a treacherous midnight strike, but he wouldn't risk it. In war, trust was a fool's currency. He retreated to a smaller side chamber for a few moments of quiet. It was an old storage room, half burned, the walls black with soot. A few crates remained stacked, haphazardly. Grey wind padded in behind him, sniffing around for threats. Robb sank to a crate, elbows on his knees, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. Weariness thrummed through every muscle. The memory of his father's voice brushed across his mind. Ned Stark had always counseled that wars should be swift and purposeful, that violence for its own sake was empty, a monstrous beast that devoured men's souls. Robb had begun this war as a boy seeking justice, and now he was a king perched on the edge of moral compromise after moral compromise. He had burned the Lion's name from Casterly Rock, taken prisoners, shed rivers of blood, and the end was nowhere in sight. Grey wind whined softly and nudged Robb's hand with his muzzle. Robb looked into the direwolf's amber eyes, seeing unwavering loyalty there. He patted the wolf's head. I'm all right, he murmured, though doubt gnawed at him. I'm all right, boy. He needed sleep, but obligations pressed. Men needed his presence. Morale was shaky. The stench of corpses lingered even within the walls, for not all the bodies had been carted away. Tywin Sieg had left the castle battered. The Greyjohn had men scouring the damage, but it was extensive. Only the cliff face and the castle's natural stone foundation provided them with a sense of security. He forced himself upright and returned to the courtyard, where the sun struggled through thick gray clouds. The morning wore on as he checked on the wounded. Edmure Tully lingered near a makeshift infirmary, wincing from a bandaged slice on his bicep. Maesters hurried about with potions and poultices, their robes stained with blood. Some men screamed in pain. Others lay unnervingly still, awaiting burial. Robb spoke words of encouragement, though he felt hollow. He promised compensation for families, swore that their sacrifices would not be forgotten. Yet each face he saw reminded him of the cost. The men listened, nodding or groaning, but their eyes asked, "Where does it end?" Eventually, he glimpsed Stannis' column beginning its departure in the distance. Hundreds of men with the Flaming Heart standard marched eastward, horses pulling supply wagons. Their silhouettes vanished into the haze of the horizon. Robb hoped they would collide with Tywin somewhere in the Crownlands, and that the old lion might finally be put down. The thought did not bring him joy, exactly, just a grim sense of necessity. Days bled together as the fortress recovered from the siege. Rain set in, pounding the scorched towers and partially extinguishing whatever small fires still smoldered in the battered wings. Roof leaks sprang forth, forcing men to shift from one chamber to another. Casterly Rock, carved from the living stone, was sturdy, but it was not immune to the ravages of war. The hallways stank of mildew and damp. Some northern soldiers muttered that the place was cursed, haunted by the ghosts of all those who had died. They said the lion's wails echoed in the cliffs at night. Robb spent his hours drilling men, overseeing repairs, and sending out patrols to re-establish contact with the scattered Westerlands. A handful of minor lords and landed knights came to the rock, trembling in the presence of the Wolf King, to swear fealty, or at least to treat with him. They came not out of love but out of fear. Fear of Tywin's retribution if they refused to side with the Lannisters, and fear of Robb Stark if they did not. Many wavered, seeing the ruined seat of House Lannister. Robb offered them a stark choice: swear the king in the north or stand aside. If they dared continue raising arms for the Lannisters, they would be stripped of land and dignity. Most knelt and kissed Robb's ring. Despite these political maneuvers, the atmosphere remained uneasy. The Northmen were strangers in a foreign land, disliked and distrusted. More than once, skirmishes broke out on the roads. A group of Northmen hunting for game was ambushed by Lannister loyalists and slaughtered. Robb responded with patrols that snuffed out the rebels, hanging them from the nearest gnarled oak. Each act of violence deepened the cycle of fear and resentment. Winter edged closer. Supplies were not bountiful in the west, especially with so many farms destroyed by the war. The gold mines remained under Bolton's watch, but gold could not feed an army. Robb worried constantly about the state of the north, where winter threatened to be harsh. He wondered if his bannermen could endure with their lord so far away. But returning home empty-handed, leaving Sansa and Arya in Lannister clutches, was unthinkable. Amid these daily struggles, Kevan Lannister languished in his tower cell. Robb made sure he was well guarded, and occasionally visited with the man to see if he had gleaned new intelligence about Tywin's whereabouts. Kevan would not betray his brother, though. He refused to give up strategic secrets, responding with stony silence or mild scorn. Still, Kevan was forced to witness the slow disintegration of Lannister influence in their own lands, which must have cut him deeply. One cold afternoon, Robb entered the cell to find Kevan pacing near a narrow window that overlooked the wind-lashed sea. The older man turned, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "Come to gloat, Stark?" Robb leaned against the wall, arms folded. "I came to see if you might be more amenable to reason. We can end this war if your family would release my sisters and cede the North's independence." Kevan gave a short bark of laughter. "End this war? Are you so naive? Even if I were in a position to negotiate, which I am not, my brother would never yield the North. As for your sisters, they're valuable hostages. The Lannisters would no more release them than you would kneel to Joffrey." Robb ground his teeth. "Your nephew is a mad dog. Even Stannis has recognized it. And your seat is taken, your lands hammered. What further need for pride do you have?" "Dendanawand." Kevan's gaze flicked to the window. "Pride is all we have left, perhaps. That, and the knowledge that my brother Tywin has never been defeated for long. You will not hold Casterly Rock forever. The realm will not forget this insult." Robb thought of the blackened tapestries, the charred lion statues. "The realm will remember my father's death, the red wedding, the treachery from your family. Your seat is forfeit because you made it so." "Then no." Kevan shook his head. Whether in sorrow or defiance, Robb couldn't tell. "If you believe Tywin orchestrated that wedding, you are a greater fool than I thought. You may find that if the war's tides shift, so too do certain alliances. Walder Frey was always a wild card. But blame who you wish." The memory of betrayal still burned hot in Robb's blood. The sense that the Freys and the Lannisters worked in concert was something he could not shake, though maybe Kevan was spinning half-truths. "Enough. I'll leave you to your cell," he said, turning away. But Kevan's parting words echoed. "You think this is the end of my house? Lions do not burn so easily, Stark." Robb slammed the door, instructing the guard to remain vigilant. The man's calm threat lodged in his thoughts, souring his mood. Even caged, Kevan Lannister radiated the unbroken pride of a long-time power in Westeros. And Robb knew that House Lannister's downfall was not yet complete. Tywin still prowled. Joffrey still sat the throne. Cersei remained in the Red Keep's shadows, manipulative as ever. Taking the rock had been a blow, but perhaps not the final one he'd hoped for. And so the days stretched, drifting into weeks, then months. Rain yielded to crisp winds, and crisp winds gave way to the first chill of approaching snowfall in the higher elevations. Word arrived, sporadic and conflicting, of Stannis' progress. Some ravens brought news of battles fought and won in the Crown Lands. Others suggested Tywin had circumvented Stannis and might be heading north for an unknown reason. The entire realm roiled like a pot on the boil, with each day bringing new rumors that threatened to overthrow yesterday's truths. What seemed certain was that Joffrey remained in King's Landing, though panic had seized the court after the fall of Casterly Rock. The Tyrells were biding their time, uncertain whether to remain allied with the Lannisters or risk a shift. Meanwhile, Walder Frey had locked down the twins, letting few pass. The Riverlands, led by House Tully Bannerman, mostly stuck with Robb, but the region was battered by raids. War had become a grim tapestry woven across all of Westeros, with no end in sight. Inside Casterly Rock, daily life ground on. The Northmen tried to adapt to the coastal climate. Salt-laden air, damp stone floors, gulls shrieking overhead. Some men took a perverse delight in mocking everything about the West. Others grew restless, missing their families. Fights broke out more often. The Great John did his best to keep discipline, but the tension was thick. Women of the keep, those who had once served House Lannister, scurried away from the wolfish soldiers, uncertain whether to fear or despise them more. Robb presided over haphazard councils with his lords, addressing supply shortages and the continuing threat of Lannister loyalists. Roose Bolton, calm and pale, suggested more ruthless tactics: public executions of suspected insurgents, floggings, punitive raids. Edmure Tully counseled moderation, mindful that there were innocents among the Westerland smallfolk. Robb struggled to find a balance. He remembered his father's compassion, but also the brutal lessons war had taught him. Mercy could be a liability. Yet he had promised himself he would not forsake all honor. In occasional quiet moments, he would stand on the battlements, gazing at the horizon where the sunset sea churned. Grey Wind often sat at his side, ears perked toward the wind. Robb wondered if the direwolf sensed the approach of winter, of deeper threats. Memories of home, of Winterfell's Godswood, of running through snowdrifts with his siblings, returned to him in half-forgotten warmth. They felt like stories from another life. Here in Casterly Rock, under a carved lion's den, he wore a crown he had never asked for, forging deals with a man like Stannis, while the father who once guided him lay in a grave in the distant south. One late afternoon, a raven arrived bearing the sigil of House Arryn. Robb read the parchment in mounting confusion. Lady Lysa, his aunt by marriage, had penned a rambling message. The Vale remained closed to outsiders. She refused to commit to war. It was typical of Lysa's paranoia, but contained a note about Sansa Stark. Sansa had apparently been seen in the Vale, under some questionable arrangement. The letter hinted that Petyr Baelish, known as Littlefinger, might have brokered Sansa's movement from King's Landing to the Vale, though the details were murky. Robb read it over twice, hardly believing. Could Sansa truly have escaped Joffrey's clutches? Was she now in the Vale, trapped under Lysa's guardianship? If so, that changed everything. He called an urgent meeting with his closest advisors, Roose Bolton, the Great John, Edmure Tully, and his mother. They gathered in Tywin's old solar, the windows open to let in the briny air. Catelyn read the letter and looked up, eyes shining with an instant of hope. "If this is true, we have a way to bring Sansa home," she said quietly. "But Lysa, she's always been unpredictable, and Baelish, he cannot be trusted." Edmure's brow furrowed. Why would Littlefinger help Sansa leave the capital? He's always had a taste for chaos, and for advantage. It could be a ploy, Roose Bolton observed. A means to lure you away from the rock, leaving it vulnerable. Or a means to control the north through your sister. If she's in the Vale, she might as well be in a gilded cage. You cannot simply ride in to retrieve her. The mountain passes are easily defended. Dendaro. Robb exhaled. I need more information. But if Sansa truly is away from Joffrey, away from Tywin, that's some small blessing. The Vale is safer than King's Landing at least. As for Arya, there's no word. She could still be with the Lannisters or lost somewhere in the Riverlands. I can't imagine how she fares. The Great John frowned. We'll keep our ears open for Arya. If Sansa is in the Vale, maybe that's something we can exploit. Lysa is your mother's sister after all. Nendero. Catelyn pressed her lips together. My sister was never the bravest woman, and Pettier Baelish has her ear. If he has brought Sansa there, it might be under the guise of a match or some political gambit. She shuddered, remembering the man's cunning. But perhaps we can at least open negotiations. A Stark in the Vale might mean an alliance that secures a route north. We could bring our armies home through the mountains if we had the Vale's support. Then, the conversation spiraled with speculation about how to proceed, but no immediate consensus emerged. Robb ended the meeting with a plan to send a small diplomatic party to the Vale, requesting an audience with Lady Lysa or Sansa herself. They would see if more direct overtures could be made. If Sansa was indeed there, perhaps she could be recovered by diplomacy, removing one more piece from the Lannisters' board. Days later, that diplomatic party, led by a minor river lord with ties to the Tullys, departed from Casterly Rock, heading east. Robb could only wait and hope. Meanwhile, the fortress stood as a lonely sentinel against the backdrop of war. Patrols brought back sporadic news of Lannister loyalists hiding in the hills or minor raids on villages. But no major host appeared. Tywin had vanished as though swallowed by the land. Autumn deepened, the clouds grew heavier, and nights turned colder. The men muttered ceaselessly about the approach of winter in the north, worried for their families. Robb tried to send messages home, instructing his bannermen to prepare as best they could, but the roads were long, ravaged by conflict. Ravens occasionally brought word of new troubles, a Greyjoy raid on the northern coast, a rumor of wildlings stirring beyond the wall. Each letter tugged Robb's heart further. He wanted nothing more than to be home, defending his own land from invaders, rather than occupying the Lannisters' keep. Yet the vow he had made, to see his sisters safe, held him fast. In the gloom of one swirling storm, a messenger galloped into the courtyard, drenched to the bone. He bore House Tarly's sigil, though he claimed to have parted ways with Mace Tyrell's forces some weeks prior. That alone set the men on edge. The Tyrells, having allied with the Lannisters in King's Landing, were not likely to send an envoy to the king in the north. But Robb let the man approach, shivering and half-frozen, as he brandished a sealed letter. "It comes from King's Landing," the messenger stammered, water dripping from his helm. "I was paid well to deliver it, told it was urgent." Robb took the letter, dismissed the messenger, and broke the seal. The parchment was penned in a neat, elegant hand, a style he recognized from official crown documents. The message was short. His Grace King Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, demands an audience with the rebel Robb Stark to negotiate peace. In exchange for the release of Kevan Lannister, we will consider returning the Stark girl. We offer safe conduct in neutral territory. Delay at your peril. It bore the signature of Grand Maester Pycelle, though Robb wondered if Pycelle had truly penned it, or if it was penned at Cersei's direction. He read it twice, letting the words sink in. Finally, he shared it with his mother and closest lords. Catelyn's lips tightened. "A trap," she murmured. "Surely a trap. The Lannisters never intended honorable peace. They tried that ruse with Ned, remember?" Edmure frowned. "Agreed. They might have Sansa, or they might not. Lysa's letter suggested otherwise, and Joffrey is not known for honesty." Still, Robb's gaze lingered on the phrase, returning the Stark girl. Even if Sansa was no longer in King's Landing, they might threaten Arya. Or Cersei might have some plan to produce a girl they claimed was Arya. Possibilities were endless, the risk immense. Roose Bolton studied the letter with a critical eye. "They want Kevan. He must be more valuable than we realized, perhaps as a stabilizing figure for Tywin or for the Lannister host. But meeting them for a parley? Folly? Especially near King's Landing. One step too far, and you lose your head." The Greyjohn agreed wholeheartedly. "We should toss this in the fire, King Robb Doherty." Robb set the letter down, tension thrumming in every vein. "I know it's likely a trap. But ignoring it means letting them believe we fear them. We also risk missing a chance to confirm Arya's status or discover the truth about Sansa's whereabouts." He rubbed his jaw, feeling the prick of stubble. "I cannot risk letting any real chance slip by. My sister's lives are at stake." Catelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your father took a risk once, Robb, trusting the Lannisters' word about peace. It ended poorly. Learn from that. Do not walk blindly into the same snare. He swallowed hard. Then we arrange a response that places us in control. Offer a neutral site far from King's Landing, perhaps in the Riverlands or an area we command. We can say we will bring Kevan, but not to them directly. We keep archers in the hills, a strong guard. If they refuse, we'll know it was only a trick. Then none argued the logic, though a sense of lingering dread clung to them all. The letter was penned, sealed, and sent by Raven the next morning. An offer for a parley at Harrenhal, still partially garrisoned by Northmen. Joffrey's or Cersei's acceptance or refusal would tell much. In the days that followed, Robb felt the slow churn of tension building again. With winter pressing close, with the rock of House Lannister still not fully shattered, the realm felt perched on the edge of a blade. Each dawn, he half expected to see a new host of enemies on the horizon. But the fields around Casterly Rock remained quiet, but for the caw of crows picking at the bones from the last great battle. One cold, starless night, Robb found no sleep. He wandered the corridors alone, gray wind at his side, passing scorched tapestries and corridors that stank of damp stone. He recalled the day he had first set foot here, the wave of triumph he'd felt upon capturing the seat of House Lannister. He recalled the fires he had ordered, the savage purge of lion emblems, the howls of men exultant in vengeance. Now, as he ran a hand over a deep scorch mark on the wall, he felt that exultation had soured. He wondered if he had become the monster the Lannisters once accused him of being, a usurper, a savage northern king. And to what end? The war dragged on. His sisters were not yet safe. The realm was in chaos. He clenched his jaw and forced himself to keep walking, as though each step might tread upon the ghosts of doubt following him. In the hush, he heard a rustling and a faint moan from one of the smaller side rooms. Candlelight flickered at the edge of the doorway. Curiosity piqued. Robb peered in and saw a pair of maesters tending a grievously wounded soldier. The man's leg was a ruin of blackened flesh. An old wound turned putrid. The soldier's face contorted in agony as the maesters tried to clean the rot. Gray wind tensed, the smell likely overwhelming. Robb started to back away, not wishing to intrude, but the soldier caught sight of him and raised a trembling hand, eyes shining with tears. "Your Grace," the man rasped, voice hoarse. You said we'd be going home soon." Robb's throat closed. So many men had asked him that question. His vow to bring them home. He hesitated. "We will," he managed, stepping forward. "In time, once the war is done, we will see our families again." The man exhaled a shuddering breath. "Just want to see my wife, my daughters. Please, let me go north, Your Grace. I'll walk if I have to." His words disintegrated into choked sobs. The maester flicked a pleading glance at Robb, as if asking him not to fill the man's head with false hopes. Robb knelt, swallowing the ache in his chest. He set a hand lightly on the soldier's shoulder. "We'll find a way," he whispered, though even as he said it, he recognized how hollow the promise might be. The soldier squeezed his hand, tears streaking his dirt-caked cheeks. Gray wind nosed forward, sniffing the man's bandaged leg. The soldier flinched but did not pull away. After a moment, Robb rose, the knot in his throat too tight for further words. He stepped out of the room, leaving the maesters to their grim work. He wandered on. Darkness seemed to seep from the walls themselves. Every hallway told a tale of pain. He recalled that first wild assault, creeping through sea caves, surprising the Lannisters in their own seat. It had felt so righteous then, so necessary. Perhaps it had been necessary indeed. House Lannister's pride had to be broken. But he found no comfort in that memory now. Only the sensation of carrying a boulder on his shoulders. The war had not ended. The real battles churned on. He made his way to the fortress's westernmost parapet, where a partial collapse had left a precarious walkway. The sea crashed below, black as ink under the moonless sky. Robb stood there until the cold wind made his eyes water. Gray wind let out a soft whine. Robb patted the direwolf's massive head, grateful at least for that unwavering companionship. Part of him wanted to cast his crown, his entire kingship, into the sea. Let the waves devour it. Yet the memory of the men who had named him king in the north, who had died for that cause, haunted him. To forsake it would be to forsake them, and to forsake his father's memory. Duty hammered in his skull, insisting he carry on. Time inched forward. At last, word came in response to Robb's raven. Joffrey, or more likely Cersei and her council, agreed to a parley at Harrenhal, set for the middle of the next moon's cycle. A flurry of anxious planning seized the northern leadership. Many believed it was a trap, but to refuse would risk losing any chance of retrieving Arya, or verifying Sansa's condition. They had Kevan Lannister as the principal bargaining chip. Preparations began for a contingent to ride out, leaving a sufficient garrison behind to hold Casterly Rock. Robb would lead personally. Some urged him not to, but he insisted. The Great John, Roose Bolton, and other seasoned warriors would accompany him. They would bring Kevan, under heavy guard, prepared to swap him for a Stark girl if the terms were right. The castle, in Robb's absence, would be entrusted to Edmure Tully and a loyal skeleton force. Edmure would have free rein to treat with any Westerlands lords who showed up. On a drizzly morning, the king in the north and his escort rode out. The battered gates of Casterly Rock groaned open, revealing an overcast sky and a stretch of wet plains. Riders carried the Stark banner high, a gray direwolf on a field of white. The sea wind whipped at their cloaks. Kevan Lannister rode among them, bound at the wrists, eyes fixed straight ahead. A hush lay over the procession, as though the fortress itself watched them depart, indifferent to who next claimed its halls. Robb glanced back at the blackened ramparts. Once, he would have felt a surge of triumph, leaving the seat of House Lannister under his own rule. Now, he only felt the dull ache of responsibility. Will return, he told himself, though he did not know what awaited him at Harrenhal. They set a grueling pace, traveling across the war-worn Westerlands. Villages bore the scars of conflict, some burned out husks, others with sullen residents who eyed the northern riders warily. In the distance, mountaintops were dusted with early snow. Once or twice, they encountered small parties of Lannister loyalists, desperate men who fled at the sight of the Stark banner, rather than risk a fight. At night, the Northmen made camp, building modest fires, foraging or hunting game. Kevan Lannister was kept under close watch, guarded by 3 men at all times. Though it was a smaller host than Robb once led, partly due to casualties, partly because he needed to leave a garrison at the Rock, the column still numbered in the hundreds, including outriders and supply wagons. Progress was slow. Rain turned roads to mud. More than once, they had to navigate around farmland turned to bog by weeks of storms. As they drew nearer the Riverlands, Robb felt a faint stirring of familiarity. This had been the main theater of war not so long ago, and it carried ghosts of its own. Charred fields, half-crumbled keeps, scorched villages. At last, Harrenhal loomed on the horizon, its gargantuan melted towers outlined against a sky that flickered with lightning. Word preceded them by raven. So the gates swung open at their approach, revealing the massive courtyard within. Harrenhal's cursed halls dwarfed all who entered. Great patches of the fortress were in ruin, black and twisted from dragonfire centuries past. Robb's men cast nervous glances at the looming towers, muttering about ghosts. Even the Great John's usual cheer dimmed as they passed under the barbican. Harrenhal was still manned by a northern garrison left behind after its initial capture. The commander, a grizzled knight named Sir Roderick Forlond, greeted Robb with obvious relief. "Your Grace," he said, bowing stiffly. "We've had no major assaults, only scattered raids by brigands in the wood. But we heard rumors of a parley. We've readied what we can for your arrival." Robb and his lords dismounted in the vast, echoing courtyard. Rain pattered on the shattered stones. Torchlight glimmered on wet granite and the half-flooded well near one corner. Horses snorted, shaking water from their manes. In the distance, thunder growled. "Thank you, Sir Roderick," Robb said. "We'll set up here. The Lannisters propose to arrive within a few days. We must fortify every approach in case of treachery. Let them see we're ready for war if they try anything." The old knight nodded. "We'll do it." Harrenhal isn't easily taken, for all its ill luck. There's enough space to house your men comfortably, though I can't promise they won't see a ghost or two." A morbid grin twisted his lips. Robb's retinue scattered to find lodging. Kevan was marched off to a secure tower cell, ironically reminiscent of the one he'd occupied at the Rock. The Great John barked orders, telling men to stable the horses and store supplies. Roose Bolton peeled off to inspect the walls, accompanied by a small band of his personal guard. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating Harrenhal's cracked battlements. Robb gazed up at the melted towers, remembering the stories. Aegon the Conqueror had burned this place with dragonfire, leaving it cursed and half-ruined. Many who held Harrenhal met grim ends. Now he stood here again, waiting for a parley with the Lannisters. A shiver traced his spine. He prayed the ancient curses would not claim him or his men. Days bled together in a quiet tension. The Northmen patrolled Harrenhal's perimeter, setting watchfires on the walls. The fortress was too large to defend perfectly, but they did their best. Rain hammered the rooftops nightly. The smell of wet stone and old ash hovered. Robb used the time to rest, catch up on council meetings, and finalize how they would handle the parley if the Lannisters came. Catelyn was left behind at Casterly Rock this time, which pained him, but he could not risk her or Edmure if treachery was afoot. On the eve of the arranged date, scouts reported sightings of a Lannister column on the horizon. They carried white flags of truce, though also the lion banner. Word spread through Harrenhal like a brush fire. Men readied arms, tension coiling tight. Robb paced the courtyard, Grey Wind at his side, while the Great John and Bolton arranged a carefully chosen group to meet the Lannisters in the yard. Archers lined the walls, ballistae were readied. If the Lannisters so much as blinked wrong, arrows would darken the sky. Finally, the horns sounded. The great iron-studded gates parted enough to admit a modest party of Lannister riders. Robb stood near the center of the courtyard, rain-soaked banners behind him. Grey Wind's hackles raised. A hush fell over the assembled men. Hooves clattered on the flagstones, echoing among Harrenhal's melted walls. Torches guttered in the wind, casting flickering light on the gleaming gold and scarlet armor of the newcomers. At their head rode Sir Jaime Lannister, newly freed from captivity by some arrangement or exchange. How, Robb did not know, but there he was, the famed Kingslayer, sporting the arrogant poise for which he was known. He wore ornate plate, chased with gold, and a crimson cloak pinned at his left shoulder. In the swirling gloom, his hair appeared tarnished gold, plastered by rain. On his left side, he wore no gauntlet. His entire left hand had been replaced by a golden facsimile. Robb realized the rumors were true. Jaime Lannister had lost a hand. Behind Jaime rode other familiar faces. Bronn, that sellsword once attached to Tyrion, eyeing the scene warily. A quartet of Lannister knights, each carrying a lance with a drooping white cloth attached. And at Jaime's side, mounted on a smaller palfrey, was none other than Qyburn, that unsettling former maester rumored to dabble in dark arts. The entire party numbered scarcely 30. But in the swirling shadows, it was enough to set every northern soldier's nerves on edge. Jaime Lannister rided to a stop a few yards from Robb. Rain trickled down his armor, beads glinting in the torchlight. He surveyed the scene, his green eyes traveling over the ring of archers on the walls, the rank of spearmen. Then he turned to Robb and gave a half-bow, mocking and theatrical. "King in the North," he said, enunciating each word with measured care. "I suppose I should thank you for the hospitality. I didn't think we would ever find common cause. But here we are." He lifted his left arm slightly, showing the golden hand as though inviting pity. "Pardon me if I don't applaud your triumphs." Robb's expression remained cold. "Jaime Lannister," he replied. "I expected you to come with more fanfare. Where is your king, or your father?" Jaime's lips curved in a wry smile. "Joffrey prefers to remain in King's Landing, bathing in perfumed baths and indulging in every grotesquerie. My father is on another matter, so I have been sent to Parley to represent the Iron Throne's interests." His smile turned sharper. "Don't worry. Cersei made me swear 1,000 times not to do anything rash." Roose Bolton's gaze flickered. "So they send the Kingslayer and a handful of men. Are we to take that as a sign of good faith or arrogance? Bah. Jaime shrugged with forced nonchalance. Take it how you like. We come with the banner of truce. The matter is simple. The crown wants Kevan Lannister returned. In exchange, we might let you keep your heads on your shoulders. We might also discuss the safe return of your precious sister, if she still remains in our custody. Robb's anger flared. He forced it down, remembering that a single snap of his fingers could have archers feather Jaime and the rest. But that might doom Arya, or any chance of real negotiation. We'll see about that, he said coolly. We can speak inside. He gestured to the fortress's great hall, where a table had been set in the least ruined portion of Harrenhal. Jaime dismounted, fumbling slightly as he tried to maneuver with his golden hand. The knights around him also dismounted. Wet and wary, they followed Robb and his retinue through Harrenhal's massive gates, boots squelching on muddy stone. Torches and iron sconces illuminated the labyrinth of corridors, the shadows dancing like restless wraiths. Every corner seemed to watch them with charred eyes, remnants of the dragon fire that once melted these walls. At last, they reached the great hall. Much of the ceiling remained intact there, though streaks of blackened stone told the story of old conflagrations. A long table was set near the center, lit by braziers. Lannister guards stiffened as they saw a ring of northern men, armed and grim. The Greatjon led a few personally, and each man's knuckles whitened around his sword hilt. Jaime surveyed the hall with a swagger, though his eyes flicked about, taking in positions of archers in the galleries above. Qyburn hovered behind him, expression neutral. Jaime said, "What is this, Stark? A dinner party? I see no venison or sweet wine." Robb ignored his jest. He motioned for Jaime and a couple of his knights to sit at one side of the table, while Robb and his lord sat opposite. "We're here to negotiate," Robb said. "And we are not your hosts. We're your foes, coming together to see if peace is possible." "Menarwender." Jaime sank down into a creaking wooden chair, resting his golden hand on the table's edge with a metallic clunk. "So, let's get on with it then. My terms are simple. Release my uncle Kevan, and the Iron Throne will graciously consider returning your sister. In addition, you will withdraw all northern forces from the Westerlands, returning to your savage snowfields, and swear an end to this rebellion." Roose Bolton let out a low hiss. The Greatjon let out a bark of laughter. Robb felt his anger rise again. Jaime's arrogance, even now, was infuriating. "You seem to have forgotten a few realities," Robb said. "Your seat, Casterly Rock, is in my hands. Your father has lost nearly every vantage in the West. Your king is despised by half the realm, and you sit here with 30 men. Yet you propose we yield?" Jaime arched a brow, leaning forward. "We still have the Iron Throne, the capital, the royal fleet, the Tyrell alliance, and more men than you might guess. And we have your sister. Perhaps your father taught you the value of family, king in the north." He tapped a golden hand meaningfully on the table. "We found that out when they took my hand." Robb's gaze flicked to Qyburn. He recalled the rumors that Qyburn had been involved in the vile procedure to treat Jaime's stump, or worse, experiments. He grit his teeth. "We have reason to believe my sister Sansa is no longer in your custody. Is it Arya you threaten me with now? Or do you even know which girl you hold?" Jaime's eyes narrowed. "I can't speak for every twist in the labyrinth that is King's Landing. But I know that your father's second daughter was rumored to be under Lannister watch. If that's changed, I'm not aware. However, I do know this. If you keep Casterly Rock, if you persist in your rebellion, the girl, whoever she is, will suffer. Joffrey delights in cruelty. My sister, the Queen Regent, is no gentler." "Menandi." That quiet statement sent a cold wave through Robb's gut. He knew Jaime spoke truth about Joffrey's sadism. He felt the hush in the hall deepen. "You would threaten a child?" Jaime's laugh was mirthless. "I'd threaten 1,000 children to save my own kin, and so would you if you were honest. Don't blame me for stating facts." A long silence stretched. Water dripped from a crack in the ceiling onto the stone floor. Every man present felt the tension coil, as if one wrong word would unleash bloodshed. Jaime's knights shifted uneasily. Grey Wind stood behind Robb's chair, silent but watchful. Finally, Roose Bolton spoke, his voice smooth. We propose an exchange. You produce Arya Stark in the flesh, confirm she is safe and unharmed. In return, you may have Kevan Lannister. After that, we discuss the possibility of a truce. But do not demand the North yield. We have broken House Lannister's hold on the West, and have no intention of bowing to a monster child and his mother. Bah! Jaime's lips tightened. And if we cannot produce Arya because we do not have her, that means Kevan remains your prisoner indefinitely, yes? Robb inclined his head. Yes. And the war continues. However, if you can produce her, if you can swear on your own honor that she is alive and safe, we can talk about releasing Kevan. We might even open negotiations about a broader ceasefire, once the other members of your family accept the North's independence. A ripple of wry humor moved over Jaime's features. And why would they accept that? Why would my father or Cersei let half the kingdom slip away? Robb exhaled. Because the North will not yield again. Your father can either watch the lion's seat crumble further, or he can cut his losses. If not, your name will burn from the memory of Westeros. We have the Rock. And it is not just me. Stannis Baratheon wages war on your nephew. The realm is in chaos. Your father cannot fight all foes at once. Then see. Jaime tapped his golden hand again, a slow, metallic clang. This is quite the predicament, isn't it? He said, almost to himself. He looked at Qyburn, who merely offered a small, placid smile. Jaime looked back at Robb. Let me get this straight. Your price is Arya Stark for Kevan Lannister. And if we manage that, perhaps further talk. If we can't or won't, you'll keep Uncle Kevan in a tower, and you'll remain in the West until the snows bury you. Robb's jaw set. Yes. Jaime spread his arms. Very well. I'll carry your demands back to King's Landing. If they comply, you'll have the girl. If they won't, the war goes on, and may the gods help us all. But let me warn you, Stark. Joffrey is not the type to be threatened. My father is the real seat of power, but Joffrey does as he pleases. If you think appealing to reason will spare your sister, you may be disappointed. And Robb felt a clench of despair. We'll see. I've no illusions about Joffrey. But Tywin or Cersei might see sense if they want Kevan back. Blood is everything to your house, is it not? Then so all. Jaime snorted, a faint quirk at the corner of his mouth. Indeed. Let us hope so. Silence fell once more. The flickering torchlight made shadows writhe across the stone floor. Every face in the hall was set in grim lines. Robb reflected that they had gained little more than words. But at least it was a line in the sand. Perhaps the Lannisters would trade. If not, the war would grind on until one side collapsed. With the negotiations concluded, for now, Jaime stood. The Great John lifted a hand, signaling the men overhead to stand down from knocked bows. Jaime's knights gave uneasy looks at the ring of northern steel. Robb escorted them back through Harrenhal's corridors, the hush of centuries pressing in around them. At the gates, Jaime turned to face Robb. This was almost civil, considering our history, he said, rain beating in his hair. I suppose I should be grateful. Your wolf didn't tear out my throat the moment I appeared. Robb didn't smile. If I had no sisters at stake, that might have been a possibility. Jaime's smirk was humorless. War makes monsters of us all. He glanced at the direwolf. Or maybe you were born to be a monster. Either way, I'll carry your demands. Don't expect a quick answer. Travel is dangerous these days, and the mood in King's Landing is tense. Robb nodded once. Safe journey. Without further words, Jaime swung into his saddle, and his party rode out under the watchful eyes of northern archers. The courtyard gates groaned shut behind them, leaving Robb to stand in the drizzle, uncertain whether he had moved any closer to saving Arya, or simply delayed further bloodshed. The thunder rumbled across the cursed towers of Harrenhal, as though mocking the ephemeral nature of mortal bargains. The Great John clapped him on the shoulder. Well, that's done. Now we wait. Robb scanned the distant forms of Jaime's men fading into the rain, trying to banish the pit of dread in his stomach. "Yes," he said quietly. "We wait." In the tense days that followed, Robb's small host lingered in Harrenhal, grappling with the weight of possibility. If a raven came with news that the Lannisters would exchange Arya for Kevan, that might be the beginning of a real chance for peace, though it would require the crown's acceptance of northern independence, which felt far away. If no word came, or if they refused, Robb would have to consider how best to use Kevan as leverage. Another possibility lurked. Joffrey could decide to kill Arya out of spite, destroying the last chance at negotiation. That kept Robb pacing at all hours, haunted by nightmares of losing his little sister forever. Yet, in the swirling gloom of Harrenhal, time stretched. Winter's approach drummed like a heartbeat under the earth, a distant but insistent promise of hardship. More men fell ill in the damp fortress, fevers and chills ripping through the camp. Rumors trickled in. Tywin was rumored to be forging new alliances in secret corners of the realm. Stannis was still battling near the Crownlands, but the Tyrells might be moving to reinforce King's Landing. The tapestry of war continued weaving itself, heedless of those who prayed for a merciful end. And in the quiet of each cold night, Robb Stark sat by a small fire, Grey Wind beside him, remembering how it all began. A father's honor, a mother's grief, a vow of vengeance. His own defiant roar as king in the north. The triumphant assault on Casterly Rock, the flames consuming lion banners. He had set out to burn the Lannister name, to carve the North's freedom in Lannister blood. Now, for all the ruin he had wrought, for all the victories claimed, he was no closer to a true peace. Every step forward in war seemed to birth new enemies, new debts of pain. The cursed stones of Harrenhal seemed to whisper that no matter how mighty one stood, or how many seats of power were toppled, the cost of vengeance was never truly paid. Over the hiss of the wind outside and the flicker of the dying fire, he almost thought he heard the old castle's walls murmuring, "Are you finished yet, young wolf? Or has the real storm only just begun?" He had no answer. And so he watched the embers glow to ash, feeling the weight of a crown press upon him, as heavily as if it were made of iron and fire, forging him into something he no longer recognized, and could not yet escape. If war was indeed a monster, it had eaten so much of him already. He wondered what was left. Still, the North remembered. He would go on, for the sake of his people, for the sake of his sisters, even if it meant treading deeper into darkness. And thus he waited in the cursed ruin of Harrenhal, a wolf haunted by the ghosts of dragons and kings, hoping that somehow, somewhere in the black labyrinth of ambition and betrayal, he might find a path that led to the light. If not, then he would make one with sword and flame, because the boy he once was, the king in the north he had become, and the memory of his father all demanded that he see this through to the bitter end.